no, oggi mungeremo la mucca. No, I'm not gonna milk the cow, but it's close to it. It's a Desmo service on a Multistrada 1260s. Yeah, it's a lot of work. On top of that, I have to change the chain and sprockets, all the liquids, probably the brake pads. Let's get to it. Tank and all the beautiful Ducati parts that you need to take off in order to get to the engine. We're going to take off this valve cover and check the valve clearance. We're also going to take this valve cover and check the valve clearance here. And of course, here are your belts for timing, the guide roller, the tensioner. There's two of each on every cylinder. How do I recognize that they are stretched and loose and it's time to change? If you're able to spin the roller, the guide roller or the tensioner with very ease, look, it's like nothing, it just spins. It means the belt is loose enough to be changed. What worries me on this particular bike is the movement of the axle. If you can, I'm not sure you can see it. I'll try to keep it stable. I'll try to keep the camera stable. When I squeeze it, the whole axle moves. And there's nothing holding this axle on this side, it's just plastic covers on that side. So I want to take off the belts and see how this one works. If there's a bearing inside there, might be bad, but that's a complete engine disassemble work if it is bad. So yeah, it's a lot of work to get into Ducati Multistrada. Lots of small cables, lots of small connectors, and yeah, lots of parts needs to come off. And also design of all those brackets here, and if you don't know where they go, where they are, like on that one, the little hooks and the screws and the pins, and this, like this one goes into some sort of spot, and there are other screws and brackets. If you don't know where they are, it's super easy to break them. There's a lots of them, like they hidden, you cannot see them, and here, and there's one down there. So yeah, Ducati. If you really want to bike like this Ducati, I'm gonna be honest with you, there is one right here, much better. So here it is, the famous Desmo. So basically what this device from 60s and 70s does is that this lobe on the camshaft is pushing and opening the valve like any other engine, four-stroke engine. And now this big one here is pushing on that lobe here, and that lobe is pulling the valve back up, so it's locking the valve. So there is no spring on the valve itself. There's a spring deep inside there, and there's one more over there. I'm not sure you can see them. So there are springs on the valves, but they not, how to say it, they are not to close the valve. The valve is being closed by push on that arm here, this arm being pushed like it is now, and now the valve is closed. And when this lobe is approaching, then this lobe suddenly ends, like you can see here. Goes and then just drops. So as you can see now, this valve is pressed down, so it means it's open. So the closing lobe, it's free from the arm, so it doesn't press the valve back up. And my opinion about this whole system, 1960, 1970, yes, it was okay. It was kind of wow. Now we have valves, we have springs that work forever. I have never ever seen, or did I? I don't think I have ever seen a cracked valve spring. I've seen cracked valve, I've seen damaged valve, I've seen snap timing chains which make the valve collide with the piston and make lots of damage in the cylinder and the head on the piston and damage the whole engines, but I never ever seen a cracked or even loose valve spring. The material is amazing now, they never lose their power. So this system is not, we don't need this anymore. I don't understand why they do it. There's lots of weight, lots of rotating masses, complicated, it's expensive. I don't like it. I don't like the system. The ease of change of the belt is very nice. Keep the belt, keep that system, yes, it's okay. It's very nice, it's as simple as on the car. For example, to do the same timing chain change on the whatever GSX-R 1000, it's 5 times more work than that one, because all you have to do is remove this plastic cover, change the belt, and that's it. It's very simple, and it's on the side, so you have easy access. But all this crap with the pushing and pulling the valves up, we don't need it. We have springs, they're good, they're fast, they're strong, they never break. That's the thing you should use. Why they keep doing it, I think it's a little bit of, history and making the bike a little bit different and give the owners something to talk about with the other owners and with other people. This one was made basically to make the valve close faster, which means the engine can go into higher RPMs because the springs have been not fast enough, but they are now. They are better. The springs now are so good, we don't need this system. So quit doing it, Ducati. Go back to proper valve. Make your bike affordable. Make your bike easier to maintain. And then people will buy it more. So, what I just found out about Ducati Multistrada 1260cc, bike that cost $1 million. I just found out that this bike has no drain hole for the spark plug. What I'm talking about is that most of the bikes, here is the spark plug, and you can clearly see if there are any crap, dust or water gets in. It's really, really hard to get it out. So there is a drain hole. Every single bike, sometimes it's down here around the exhaust, sometimes it's on the side. But there is a drain hole. So basically, if I fill this up with water, the water will come out here. If there's a dust or anything, it comes out here. Ducati, they don't have a drain hole, and this is what happens. This one is straight behind the wheel, so all the shit when you drive flies straight in. And this is a spark plug cap with a cable, and all this stuff goes in, and there is no drain hole. There's a second spark plug here. This spark plug doesn't need a drain hole because it's outside, so the cap can be dirty, but there is no drain hole anywhere on the cylinder head. And that's what happens if you don't have a drain hole. All the crap that goes into the spark plug house sits there and corrodes. This is amazing. Here is a quick tip how to make sure that this drain hole is open. Remove your spark plug cap. Do not remove the spark plug, just the cap. Compress air and you blow in. And if you have lots of dust, it will fly out here. Obviously this is going to be closed because the head is going to be still on the engine. That's how you clean it, and you make sure that this one is open and it can drain all the condensation, water and dust, so you're not ending up with this. That's a disaster. Second spark plug from the back cylinder looks the same. Jesus. The crap was flying in, the water was getting in, the condensation, the dust from all those years. Well, there's no drain hole here either. Oh, there you go. Here are the valves, and we're gonna check the clearance first before we can decide if they needs to be adjusted or not. There are many different type of valves and adjustment system. This one is, in my opinion, one of the worst one, because you have to remove completely everything from the top in order to change the valve clearance. Unlike some bike like old Kawasaki's, where you can move the lobe rocker arm to the side and you can remove the shim and put the correct one in. Or when you have just a small screw with the nut for locking, we adjust the valve clearance by moving the screw in or out and locking it with the nut. In this case, you have to remove the belt, you have to remove the camshaft holder and the camshaft itself. You have to record the gap before you do this. Then you have to measure the shims under the lobes, and then you can adjust the valve by putting a different shims. On Ducati, and only on Ducati, not only but on most of them, if you remove the spark plugs, you can very easily rotate the engine. Why? Because there is no tension from the valve springs pushing on the lobes. There are little springs in there, like I said before, but they're not strong enough to create enough force. So you can rotate by the camshaft. On normal bike, I wouldn't dare to do that even with the spark plugs removed, because the pressure from all the valve springs is too big and you can actually destroy the bolt or the nut on the camshaft, or even make it loose. So I will turn by the crankshaft if I have to. But on Ducati, there is almost no friction, so we can do that on the camshaft. Now, in order to check the gap between two pieces of metal, in this case a lobe on the camshaft and the rocker arm, you need to have a feeler gauges. Very simple tool. It's just a piece of flat metal, very precisely made to be certain thickness. For example, this one says 100, which means it's 1 millimeter thick. The rest, it says 90, 80, 20, 35, whatever. That means it's after the zero, which is 0. For example, this one says 50, it's 0.5, which means that is a half a millimeter, and then you have 3/10 of a millimeter, 2/10, and then you have halves like 15 and 25 and 35, blah blah blah. Very simple stuff. So basically, what you do to measure the valve clearance is you're measuring the gap between, in this case of that engine, a lobe and the rocker arm. For example, this one is 40 and it doesn't go, no chance, because the 40 is too thick. The gap should be smaller. Every bike has its specific clearances that you have to check in the book. What does it say? Why do we need gaps between the metal parts? First of all, is because we need an oil film between them in order to be lubricated. If there is no oil film, all those metal parts are going to rub against each other and get damaged very quickly. The second reason is because everything on this planet, when it gets hot, it grows, which means it expands, including metal. So when the camshaft and the lobes and the rocker arms and the valves and the cylinder and the pistons and absolutely everything on that engine, when it gets hot, it gets bigger. And when it gets bigger, the gaps between those elements getting smaller, because the elements are not moving away from each other, they're growing, so the gaps between them getting smaller. So we need some kind of gaps when the engine is cold. Those gaps are calculated in order to be almost zero when the engine is at its top temperature. Obviously this engine will reach some kind of temperature and it's optimal temperature, and all those gaps are going to disappear because of the heat expansion. If any component is getting too hot, something is wrong with the engine, either is lubrication, cooling, or something else. Now, in order to check those clearances, you have to set the lobes in the correct, some kind of position. Sometimes the book gonna tell you what it is. Sometimes people like to put the lobes in exactly the opposite direction of the valve, which is 180 degrees, which means when the valve is that way, the lobe needs to be this way. And now you can measure it like that and like that. then like that, and like that. Or like this. Usually in the workshop manual there will be information in which position the camshaft needs to be set, or different parts needs to be set in order to check the clearance. Do that. What I like to do is I like to measure the clearance in few positions. When it's almost opening, obviously not when it's opening, because now the lobe is pressing on the rocker arm and on the valve itself. But here is almost open, and then 180 degrees away. Yeah, why I do that, I'm going to show you in a second. I'm going to choose the blade that says 15, which is actually, I call them 15, but it's actually 0.15 of a millimeter. 1/10 and 5 of a hundredth. And it goes nicely. And then we take, those are very nice Wurt. I like to use them if they fit, because they're kind of wide. 20 doesn't go. It doesn't want to slide in, which means this gap is around 0.15 of a millimeter. But if I rotate the shaft a little bit to, let's say, that position, the 20 slides in now. That's why I like to check in different positions, because now I discovered that actually the clearance in the most open place, which is now, is 20. So the reading before in this position was fail, because 20 doesn't go. You will say, so it's not 20, it's less. But if you rotate the shaft a little bit, 20 goes in without any problems. So I like to check, doesn't matter what the book says, that position, this position, that position. I like to check almost all the way around the lobe. Obviously not on when the lobe is pushing on a valve, but all the way under. I like to do this because I want to know what is the biggest gap, not the smallest gap, or what is the gap in the right position. I want to know what is the biggest gap. Like here now, it doesn't go. The 15 will go right now very easily. 15 will go here, 20 doesn't go. But like I said, a little bit more and the 20 goes. And it's even looser now. I guess 25 will not go, but I will just check. Yes, 25 doesn't go. So now I know that this gap is around 0.2 of a millimeter. And I will adjust accordingly to the biggest gap I can find between the lobe and the rocker arm, or between the lobe and the glass, because sometimes the valves are pushed by something called glass, which have a shims on top of it, or sometimes under. Different design. BMW, for example, uses lobe, a rocker arm, and then under the rocker arm there's a little half ball, which you have to measure it. They don't use plates, they don't use shims. They call shims, but they're not shims, they're like a half ball size. So different bikes, different design, but like I said, I like to find the biggest gap, not the gap in this certain position, but the biggest possible gap between those two elements. And now I know that the biggest possible gap between lobe and the rocker arm is 20, and I will check that with the specs. Every single bike has its specifications, which are information in the book or in paper somewhere that tells you what this gap should be. So when the engine gets hot and everything expands, the gap goes almost to zero. Now, can the gap be too big or too small? From these two scenarios, the better option is to have a gap too big, because the valve will still open a little bit. It will create some noise, but you can probably drive home with it. If the gap is too small, when the engine gets hot and all of those components gonna expand, then the valve will not lock all the way down, and this is much more dangerous than gap being too big and valve not opening all the way enough. It will always open enough to get new load into the cylinder. It will always open enough to get the gases out, but if it's not closing all the way, either of those, you're going to lose a lot of compression, you're going to backfire, you're going to burn the valves. Yeah, and from these two scenarios, it's better to have a gap too big than too small. But it's important when you adjust the valves to be between the specifications. Sometimes the specs on some BMW bikes, it doesn't say from 0.1 to 0.2. It says 0.15, and you have to be plus or minus 0.03 in that range. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to check all those gaps and put them down on the paper, and then we're going to compare them with what the manual says they should be. Okay, so it's actually quite fun. Well done, Ducati. All the valves, the openers and the closers, compared to what I have in on the shop manual, they all in specs. 15 and 15 on that one, and it's from 10 to 25. When I adjust the valves, I like to keep them a little bit more to the higher value, to the higher number, which, for example, here the valve should be between 10 and 25. I like to keep it around 20, because I like to keep them more open than closer to the higher value than to the lower value, because then when engine gets hot and it all expands, then it's getting really tight there, and it's important to have the oil between the metal. The oil film needs to have a place, and I just like to be on the higher value, closer to the higher value of the specifications for any bike. So there will be no it's actually surprising, but I think this bike had the last valve check much later than it's supposed to be, which means it's much closer to the valve check now. So I'm thinking, yeah, we're not going to change any shims. They're all in specs. I'm guessing in 30,000 kilometers there will be probably on this cylinder here we're going to be very close to the minimum gaps, close enough that we're going to have to do something about it, but that's for the next service. As far as now, all looks good, and this bike will have a lots of things changed now. All the belts, all the tensioners and the pullers, the chain and sprocket, the steering bearing, the grips, heated grips, we have to mount original because that's what you're supposed to have when they get worn. We could replace them with the Oxford, but then I'm pretty sure there's going to be a fault code about the grips that they're not working or they disconnected, and we cannot connect the Oxford heated grips to the original system because it's not going to work. So I order original grips from Ducati. We're going to replace them. Like I said, steering bearing, coolant, brake fluid front and back, chain and sprockets, valves are good. We're going to put new belts, new gaskets on the tops, spark plugs, and I think brake pads. I have to check which one, but one of them it's worn. I think it was back. Front looks quite okay. I checked before. Yeah, so now it's time to go to my local Ducati store, because I don't think there is anybody who produces the spare parts for this Ducati aftermarket. Like I don't think you can buy belts, or put it in comment if you know that you can buy belts from somebody else than Ducati. Maybe the belts, yes, but I don't think anybody makes aftermarket tensioners. The spark plugs, obviously, NGK, the best spark plugs on the planet. Brake pads, I'm using a Scandinavian braking system they call SBS. Very good brake pads. Liquids is going to be either Motul or Castrol. Brake fluid I'm using is Bosch. And that's it. Let's go to the shop, pick up all the parts. I got the message that they are in stock now. Let's replace the heated grips. Let's put the new belts, close up the engine, put all the parts back on. Then the last thing we're going to do is change the chain and sprockets. And that's it. And then is the best part of my job, a test drive. So the parts are here. We got the guiding rollers, tensioners, 2 new belts, chain and sprockets. Look at the new nice sprocket. And heated grips. Unfortunately, It's impossible to buy just the rubber if you want to replace it because you got damaged or it's just worn, like in that case. It's just, you know, worn and it doesn't hold as good as it's supposed to. If you want original, you have to buy it the whole grip with the cable and entire twist. This is ride-by-wire, so it's a cable for the heated grip and a cable for the throttle control. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 7 cables. 7 cables to control a throttle. Instead of 1 or 2 metal wires, you have 7 electric cables. 7. And if you want to change them for original Ducati, they cost 4 times more than the highest and the best top model of the Oxford heated grips. Why, Ducati? Why? So what I'm going to do now is change the chain and sprockets, and then we're going to change the heated grips, and you're going to see this very quickly. And if you don't like the KX250, there's something wrong with you. Very quickly, why I don't like the front sprocket covers or on any bikes, why I removed it on my Honda and why I will remove it on any bike I own, and I don't care about the noise. That's why. Here's the reason. And it's much more than just that. It's all the way behind there. It's all over. And you don't see it, and you're happy, and you just ride your bike, and you don't complain. And what's happening in there is just mess. It's destroying corroding your engine, destroying your chain. That's why I remove all the covers from all the bikes I have. I want to see the sprocket. I want to see what's going on there. If you know you're not going to open this and clean once every 2 or 3 weeks, just remove it completely. I haven't noticed the camera was not rolling. I replaced the chain. The camera was not recording. It stopped, but the new chain and new sprocket is on. All this needs to be washed. Yeah, everything about this bike is kind of different than normal. The way that you adjust the back wheel is the entire hub that moves. The entire hub that contains bearings. I think there's 2 ball bearings and 1 needle bearing. The whole hub moves together with the sprocket and the brake discs and the entire wheel. That's how you adjust. You rotate it, it's out of center. So when you rotate it, it moves the sprocket back or forwards. That's how you adjust the chain. So now it's adjusted. It's going to have to be readjusted after about 100, 150 kilometers. That's what I always like to do. Readjust them after a while because they need to kind of break in for a few hours. And what I also did, without you knowing, I start to remove the belts, and the belts are already removed. So you can see there is no belts here, and you can move the shafts. I can move them. I'm not moving that one, even though I can. What I do with this type of timing, I simply mark my own, I make my own marks. I completely don't look at the marks that are on the engine. Those marks doesn't matter anything because the size of that wheel is different than the size of that wheel, so they don't rotate at the same speed. They match once every 10 minutes or something, or some rotations, so I don't look at them. I remove the tensioners and the guides, and the old belts are off. They are right here. Kind of soft, much softer and much more playable than the new one. So what I do, I make a mark on the wheel on the crankshaft or whatever pulls the chain or the belt or the sprocket. Sometimes there's like a bunch of sprockets here on some bikes for a timing. I made a mark and then I simply count the belts, or I count the links if it's a chain, and I just count how many links to this next mark on the intake camshaft or exhaust, doesn't matter which way you go. On that one was easier to go that way, on this other one was easier to go the other way. So I simply count how many thieves are on the belt, on the chain or on the sprockets. Then I make a mark on the exhaust camshaft, and then I count from the mark to the intake camshaft, and I also count how many links on the chain or on the belts. I write it down, and that's how I put the new one back on. So I know it's exactly as it was, even though I'm not paying attention to the marks on the engine. You can do it this way, you can do it that way. I know that this settings was correct because the bike was driving. You could use it. The bike came here on the wheels, it was drivable, so I know this was correct. If somebody bring me the brand new engine, if somebody comes with the belts or chain off, or they brings only engine, then yes, I have to refer to the books, find the mark, put everything in the proper position. That's how I do it. But if I know what I'm doing with the belts or with the chains, I just simply count links, and that's it. You never can go wrong if you count correctly. Don't do this drunk because you're gonna miscalculate. And so I'm gonna put the new belts now on. I'm gonna count how many links is from my mark here on the crankshaft. It's not the crankshaft, but it's coming from the crankshaft. It's supposed to be 39 links to the first mark on the exhaust, and then from the first mark is going to be 15 to the first mark on the intake shaft, and so on. You have to start with the back cylinder because this belt sits deeper and this one sits on the outside. So yeah, simple stuff, but in general everything about this bike is different. The way they use the way they make a timing is different. The way the wheels are mounted is different. The way the rim sits on the hub is different. So the shock absorber is only on the one side of the swing arm, which in my opinion makes too much pressure on the axle for the swing arm on one side, because each time the wheel goes up and down and the shock works, it kind of creates the tension going that way on the axle, which means the bearing in the axle, the bearing in the swing arm, on this side is getting pushed backwards, and on the left side is being pushed forwards, which generates kind of twisting motion, which I don't like. Anyway, this bike has already free play in the swing arm, but we're going to fix that on the next service. So let me put the new belts on, and then I'm going to change the heater grips. So the new belts, tensioners and the rollers are in the place. They adjusted to the correct specification. 12 years ago I opened a box with the name Gates on it. I pull out an ultrasonic belt tension meter or ultrasonic meter from the Gates. I checked the price on the internet. It was super expensive and it was super not necessary for me, so I decided to sell it. Today I was crying because I sold it and I don't have it anymore, so I have to use the app on the phone. It's accurate, 90 Hertz plus minus 10 Hertz. I use the app on the phone that measures the frequency of the belt when you strike it. If that would be my bike, I will do it without any tools, just by feeling it logically how it's supposed to be. After so many years working with the bikes and the belts and bearings and wheels and screws and nuts, you kind of develop the feeling in your hands and in your senses that something is right or wrong or more or less okay. If that would be my bike, I will just do it without any tools, just by touching them, spinning the engine and just by feel. It's around 90, both of them. they're gonna drop to probably 80 after some time because the belt gonna stretch and wear into the sprockets or pulleys or whatever they call them. But yeah, the belts are on. Now it's time to change the grip, as long as I have everything open, because the cables for the grip going all the way down here. And then we're gonna start putting it back together so it can go back to the customer today. Yes, happy days. Now it is time to connect the Ducati to the diagnostics. Delete the fault codes, delete the service light, and check if the valve and all those DVT bullshit crap works. So we need to connect this one into the bike, and I have a big mess with my cables, so this is a good opportunity to sort it out. Go through this and see if we can find the one we need. That's the Honda, that's the BRP, Can-Am Spiders, ATVs and stuff like that. I think this also works on Kawasaki. This is Kawasaki as well. The hell is that? Harley Davidson? I don't know. So this one is Kawasaki. Jet skis, bed skis and all this stuff. So this is Hiltech Electronics, so that's go there. This is one of them is a switch between Kawasaki Diagnostic and Kawasaki ABS, so this goes there. This is BMW, and I already checked, and I'm not able to connect the Ducati to my laptop with that, because normally what you do, you take a cable like this with the Ducati 4-pin plug. That's a new plug. There is also an old one, which is like a Piaggio, with this and those two cables. That works on the older Ducatis. This is the new one. And when I connect this to the bike and to the sender, the computer doesn't want to receive. So what I have to do, I have to connect that one to the USB cable, which was just here. Yeah, this one. So we're gonna make a transfer like that, and then we use the normal USB to the laptop. Run the JPL diag, delete the codes, check everything, set the service date. And that's it. Let's do it. I'm gonna clean this up later. It's very hard for me to clean the cables. I never liked Ducati. 10-12 years ago I owned some Monster 600 and some 996. I don't even remember those bikes. I still don't like them. I don't kind of like to work on them. I don't know why. It's maybe it's because they are so different and I'm so used to Japanese technology and Japanese solutions. If I maybe work longer with those, I will fall in love with them and work only on Ducati. I don't know. I know that can happen because I had that happen to me with the Can-Am and BRP products. I worked for Can-Am for 7 years, and after 5 I said I will never ever touch anything else that is not BRP. But as you can see, I'm here now. Multistrada, very fast bike. Quick shifter helps a lot. The beautiful sound from this aftermarket exhaust. Is it bike for me? No, it's not. If I have the money and I have to go and buy one bike like this, I will probably end up with a 1250 or 1200 or even two 1150 GS Adventures, the old one. Yes, I love them. They're very good bikes, but this Ducati is really pretty, really fast, really comfortable. I bet for a long trip, if you have to go for a whole week, 5,000 miles, that's the bike to go. I don't like it because I don't know why. I cannot explain my hate. Hate maybe is too much, but I cannot explain why I don't like Ducati. It's difficult for me to even understand myself. I don't know, maybe I met someone long time ago on a Ducati and he was an ass. No idea. Anyway, to make this long story short, because this video is getting way too long, lots of new components on it, big service done. The customer will be happy for another 30,000 kilometers or 15 when he comes for the small service, I guess. I hope so. I hope he's gonna be satisfied with all my work. Like I said, very comfortable bike, very nice to ride, kind of jerky on the low speed and low RPM, but as soon as you reach highway speeds, it's very smooth. It's very comfortable for you as a rider and for your passenger. So I have to finish now because I have to go and open the engine on a 1250 GS because we have a noise from the rod. The guy was driving without the oil and now the engine is dead, so I have to diagnose first, is it worth fixing it or do we have to get the new engine? So Ducati 1260s Multistrada, it's very pretty, very fast, very comfortable and very overall nice motorcycle, but not for me. So goodbye Ducati, thank you very much for watching, and as always, see you in the next one.